I always thought my life with Emily was a quiet masterpiece, painted in soft hues of routine and trust. 20 years of marriage had woven us into a tapestry of predictability. Breakfast at 7, her yoga classes on Tuesdays, my late nights at the accounting firm. We weren't the type to chase wild passions or grand gestures. Ours was a steady rhythm, a comfortable hum. She was my anchor, the woman who'd stood by me through the lean years, the miscarriages, the endless tax seasons that left me hollow-eyed. I'd watch her sometimes, her auburn hair catching the morning light, and think, this is enough. But last spring something shifted. It was subtle at first, like a breeze you don't notice until the curtains flutter. She started lingering after her yoga sessions, her phone buzzing more than usual. She'd smile at the screen, her fingers dancing over it in a way that felt private. I asked once casually who she was texting. Just a friend from class, she said, her voice light but her eyes darting away. I let it go. Trust, I told myself, was the bedrock of us. Then came the day I found the receipt. It was tucked in her purse, crumpled like an afterthought. A dinner for two at La Petite Maison, a place we'd never been together. The date was a Wednesday, a night she'd told me she was meeting her sister. I stood in our kitchen, staring at the slip of paper, my chest tightening. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I noticed the new perfume she wore, sharp and unfamiliar. The way she'd hum under her breath, a tune I didn't recognize. The late nights she claimed were girls' outings. Each detail stacked like bricks in a wall I didn't want to see rising. I started digging. It wasn't hard to access her phone one night while she slept. The passcode was still our anniversary. Ironic that her messages with Jen weren't about yoga or gossip. They were cryptic, playful, edged with something intimate. Can't wait to see you again, one said. Last time was unforgettable. Another. Jen wasn't Jen. The number wasn't her sister's. My hands shook as I scrolled, the screen's glow burning into my retinas. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, listening to her soft breathing, wondering who she'd become. The next morning, I followed her. She left in her usual yoga gear, but I trailed her car past the studio, down winding streets to a house I didn't know. A man opened the door, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grin that made my stomach lurch. She didn't hesitate. She stepped into his arms, and they vanished inside. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened, the world tilting. This wasn't a fling. This was a betrayal carved deep, deliberate, alive. His name was Marcus. I found it out later, piecing it together like a detective in a story I never wanted to star in. Marcus Reed, 38. A personal trainer with a chiseled jaw and a reputation for charm. I saw his face on her phone's lock screen once, a photo she'd set briefly before switching it back to our dog. But that glimpse was enough, his dark eyes, his easy smile. He was everything I wasn't. Bold, physical, unrestrained. I'd spent my life behind desks, crunching numbers, while he sculpted bodies and, apparently, stole wives. I didn't tell Emily I knew. Couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, heavy and jagged. Instead, I let the silence grow between us, a chasm she didn't seem to notice. She'd come home from yoga, her cheeks flushed, her laughter too bright, and I'd nod, pretending I didn't smell his cologne on her skin. I'd cook dinner, her favorite pasta with basil, and watch her eat, wondering if she thought of him while she twirled the noodles. Did she compare us? Did she laugh at me in her head? I started tracking her more. A GPS app on her phone, synced to mine, showed me her patterns. Twice a week, she'd go to Marcus's place. Sometimes more. I'd sit at work, staring at the little dot on my screen, imagining what they were doing. My colleagues noticed my distraction. Tom asked if I was okay, his brow furrowed. Just tired? I lied, forcing a smile. But I wasn't tired. I was unraveling. Every ping of her location was a needle in my chest, stitching a tapestry of rage and humiliation. One night, I drove to his house. It was late, the street quiet, the windows of his bungalow glowing softly. I parked across the road, hidden by shadows, and watched. She was there. I'd seen her car. The curtains were parted just enough to show their silhouettes. Her leaning close, him touching her arm. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat there, hours ticking by, until she finally emerged. She looked happy, radiant. I followed her home, keeping my distance, and when she slipped into our bed beside me, I pretended to sleep. Her warmth felt like a lie pressing against me. I needed proof, something concrete. So I hired a guy, discreet, expensive, recommended by a client who'd caught his own spouse straying. His name was Vince, a wiry man with sharp eyes and no questions. 2 weeks, he said, pocketing my cash. You'll know everything. I didn't tell him I already knew too much. I just wanted the details, the undeniable truth, to hold in my hands like a weapon. Because I wasn't going to let this end quietly. Not after 20 years. Not after her. Vince delivered. 2 weeks later, he slid a manila envelope across a diner table, his expression blank. You sure you want this? He asked, sipping his coffee. I nodded, my throat dry. Inside were photos. Crisp, time-stamped, merciless. Emily and Marcus at a cafe, her hand on his. Them walking into his house, her laughter caught mid-frame. One shot, through a window, showed them tangled on his couch, her head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. There were audio files too, snippets of calls Vince had intercepted. Her voice, soft and eager. I've never felt like this. His low and teasing. You're mine now. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, a coldness settled in me, sharp and clear. I thanked Vince, paid him the rest, and drove home with the envelope burning a hole in the passenger seat. Emily was out, another girl's night, and I spread the evidence across our dining table. Each photo was a wound, but also a spark. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. She'd taken our life, our quiet, steady life, and handed it to him like it meant nothing. I started planning that night. Revenge wasn't a word I'd ever lived by, but it fit now, snug and inevitable. I didn't want a divorce, not yet. That was too easy, too clean. She'd humiliated me, carved me open, and I wanted her to feel something worse. I wanted Marcus to feel it too. But how? I paced our house, the walls closing in, until an idea flickered. Something cruel, something lasting. I'd use what I knew about her, about them, to dismantle their little world. First, I studied Marcus. His social media was public, a parade of gym selfies and motivational quotes. He had a business, Read Fitness, small but growing. Clients raved about him online, women mostly, their comments dripping with admiration. He was cocky, careless. That was his weakness. Emily's was harder to pin down. She was smart, meticulous, but she'd let her guard down with him. She'd gotten sloppy, trusting this secret would stay buried. I'd make sure it didn't. I kept up the charade at home. How was your night? I'd ask when she returned, her hair slightly mussed. Great, she'd say, kissing my cheek with lips that had been elsewhere. I'd smile, nod, and retreat to my office, where I'd pore over Vince's files. I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. I needed more. More leverage, more pain to wield. Because when I hit them, it wouldn't be a slap. It'd be a reckoning. The plan took shape slowly, a dark bloom unfurling in my mind. I couldn't just expose them, that was too simple, too fleeting. I wanted them to suffer, to unravel in ways they couldn't predict or escape. Marcus's business was my first target. It thrived on his reputation, his charm, his image as the perfect man. I turned that into ash. Emily's part would come later, something personal, something that cut deeper than shame. I'd been a numbers man my whole career. Precision was my strength. I'd use it now. I started with anonymous tips. A burner phone, a few well-worded emails to his clients. Ask Marcus about his hygiene standards. Heard he's not certified. Check his credentials. Nothing provable, just enough to plant doubt. I dug into his past too, hiring Vince again to scrape up dirt. Turns out Marcus had a history. Shady loans, a gym he'd run into the ground 5 years back, complaints from female clients he'd charmed too aggressively. I fed it all to a local fitness blog, posing as a concerned ex-customer. The post went up quietly, but it spread. His reviews started dipping. I watched it unfold online, sipping coffee in our kitchen while Emily hummed in the shower. She didn't know. Neither did he, not yet. But I saw the cracks. Fewer bookings, tense posts about haters on his page. I escalated it, sending a package to his landlord. Photos of Marcus with different women, including Emily, captioned, "Your tenant's a risk." The lease was month to month. I figured a nudge might push him out. Sure enough, a week later, his gym's address changed to a cheaper spot across town. Smaller, shabbier. Emily noticed his stress. She'd come home quieter, her phone calls shorter. "Everything okay?" I asked one night, feigning concern. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just a rough week." I almost laughed. Rough for him, maybe. For her, it was just the start. I kept my mask on, playing the oblivious husband, while I worked in the shadows. I had contacts, old clients, favors owed. One was a health inspector, a gruff guy named Paul. I called him, casual at first, then slipped in the ask. "Heard about a gym cutting corners. Read fitness. Might be worth a look." Paul grunted, promised nothing. But 2 days later, Marcus posted about a bullshit inspection. I smiled into my whiskey. I wasn't done. I bought a cheap camera, set it up near his new place, and caught him yelling at a client. Red-faced, unhinged. The video went to another blog, this time with a burner account linked to a fake name. "Marcus Reed loses it," the headline read. His followers dropped. His bravado cracked. I felt a thrill, cold and sharp, watching him squirm. But Emily, she was still glowing, still sneaking off to him. That's when I knew hurting him wasn't enough. I had to break her too. Emily's weakness was her pride. She'd built a life she loved showing off. Our house, her volunteer work, the perfect marriage she bragged about to her friends. I'd let her keep that illusion, feeding it with my silence, my dinners, my "I love yous." But beneath it, I was crafting something vicious. I wanted her to lose everything. Not just Marcus, but the world she draped around herself like armor. I'd strip it away, layer by layer, until she stood bare and broken. I started with her social circle. She had a tight-knit group, book club ladies, yoga moms, the kind who sipped wine and traded gossip. I knew them well. I'd hosted their brunches, fixed their spreadsheets. They trusted me, so I planted seeds. Emily's been distant lately. I'd say, voice heavy with worry. "I hope she's okay." They'd press, and I'd shrug, letting them fill the gaps. Then I leaked a photo, one of Vince's, blurry but clear enough, showing her with Marcus at that cafe. I sent it to Karen, the group's loudmouth, from a throwaway email. "Thought you should know." The whispers spread fast. Karen called Emily, fishing for denials. I overheard the tense conversation. Emily's voice sharp, defensive. "It's nothing, just a friend." But the damage was done. Invites slowed. Texts went unanswered. I watched her frown at her phone, confused, then hurt. "They're being weird," she muttered one night. I nodded sympathetically, hiding my satisfaction. Her perfect little world was fraying, and she didn't even know why. Next, I hit her sanctuary, the yoga studio. She taught there sometimes, a side gig she adored. I sent an anonymous complaint to the owner. Vague accusations about inappropriate behavior with clients, hinting at Marcus. No proof, just enough to raise eyebrows. The owner called her in. She came home shaken. "They're cutting my hours," she said, eyes glassy. "They won't say why." I hugged her, murmuring comfort, while inside I felt the gears turning. She was slipping and I was pushing, but the real blow was still brewing. I'd saved the best or worst for last. Marcus was crumbling, his business teetering, his confidence shot. But he still had her. I changed that. I'd make her see him for what he was, then take him away entirely. And when she turned to me, expecting the old, steady me to catch her, I'd be gone too. That was the cruelty of it. Not just revenge, but abandonment. She'd have nothing left. Emily's world was shrinking, and I could see it in her eyes. Confusion hardening into something brittle. She'd lost her footing with her friends. Her yoga gig was fading, and Marcus was no longer the unshakable pillar she'd leaned on. His business was a mess, his temper flaring in public, and I'd made sure every stumble echoed back to her. But she still clung to him, sneaking off to his dingy new gym or that cramped house he'd moved into after the landlord kicked him out. I'd watch the GPS on my phone, her betrayal pulsing like a heartbeat, and feel my resolve harden. She thought he was her escape. I'd make him her ruin. I decided to turn Marcus into a mirror, force her to see him as weak, flawed, unworthy. I'd already chipped away at his image, but now I'd go deeper. Vince had dug up more. Marcus had a gambling habit, small time but messy, racking up debts with bookies who didn't mess around. I contacted one, an old client's shady cousin, and passed along Marcus's name with a tip. "He's dodging you." It didn't take long. A week later, Emily came home rattled, her voice tight. Marcus got jumped outside his place, bruised up bad. She thought I'd care. I feigned shock, asked if he was okay, while picturing his swollen face with grim satisfaction. The beatings became regular. Not enough to destroy him, just enough to keep him jumpy, broke, diminished. Emily started covering his bills. I saw the withdrawals from our joint account, small at first, then bolder. She didn't know I'd set up alerts. "Where's the money going?" I asked one night, keeping my tone mild. She froze, then mumbled about charity. I let it slide, but the lie fueled me. She was draining us for him, and I'd used that too. I transferred most of our savings to a private account she couldn't touch, let her scramble when the well ran dry. I kept feeding her doubts. I'd leave articles open on my laptop, stories about failed trainers, broken men, knowing she'd see them. I'd mention offhand how some guys can't handle pressure. Watching her flinch, she started defending him less, her glow dimming. One night, she snapped, "He's not perfect, okay?" I just nodded, letting her stew. The cracks were widening, and I was ready to pry them open. Marcus wasn't her hero anymore. He was a liability, and I'd make sure she felt every ounce of his weight. I wasn't done with him yet, though. I'd saved a trump card. His ex Vince tracked her down. A woman named Tara, bitter and talkative. She'd left Marcus after he drained her savings, and she had stories. I met her at a dive bar, bought her a drink, and listened as she spilled. "He's a user," she said, eyes hard. "Charms you, then bleeds you dry." I asked if she'd talked to Emily. Tara smirked. "For a price." I paid it. The meeting was set. Tara was a wildfire, raw, unfiltered, perfect for my plan. I arranged it carefully, staging it as a chance encounter. I knew Emily's routine, coffee at that little shop on Elm every Thursday after yoga. I tipped Tara off, gave her Emily's photo, and waited. That afternoon, Emily came home pale, her hands trembling as she set her bag down. "Some woman cornered me today," she said, voice shaky. "Said she knew Marcus. Said awful things." I tilted my head, concerned. "What things?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Lies. About him using people. Taking money." I murmured sympathy, hiding the thrill in my chest. Tara had struck deep. Emily didn't go to Marcus that night. She stayed home, pacing, her phone silent. I watched her wrestle with it, doubt gnawing at her, Tara's words sinking in. I didn't push. I didn't need to. She was doing the work herself, imagining him as the parasite Tara painted. The next day, she called him. I overheard through the wall, her tone sharp. "Is it true? Did you take her money?" His muffled protests filtered through, but she hung up, eyes red. I stayed quiet, letting the poison spread. She was starting to see him, really see him, and it was tearing her apart. I tightened the screws on Marcus. His debts were mounting, his gym barely afloat. I sent another tip to the bookies, his new address, his schedule. They roughed him up again, this time in front of clients. Word spread, his last loyal customers bailed. He posted a rant online, desperate and sloppy, blaming jealous losers. I screenshotted it, sent it to Emily from a burner. "This who you're with?" She didn't reply, but I saw her staring at her phone later, lips pressed thin. She was fraying, and I was pulling the threads. Her friends were gone now, Karen had spread the photo, and the whispers turned to silence. The yoga studio let her go entirely. Scheduling conflicts, they said, but she knew it was more. She'd sit on the couch, staring at nothing, her pride crumbling. I'd bring her tea, play the doting husband, while plotting the next blow. Marcus was her lifeline, and I'd cut it soon. But first, I'd let her sink lower, let her feel the isolation, the shame, the weight of her choices. She'd chosen him over me, over us. She'd pay for that. I started leaving clues. A receipt from his old gym, tucked in a drawer she'd find. A note in my handwriting. Marcus called. Left by the phone, though he hadn't. She'd ask, hesitant, "Did he say anything?" I'd shrug. "Just asked for you." Her paranoia grew. She'd check her phone obsessively, jump at every noise. She didn't know I was orchestrating it, but she felt the walls closing in. I wanted her trapped, doubting everything, before I delivered the final stroke. Marcus was a shell now, broke, battered, clinging to what little he had left. I'd watched him unravel, and it was satisfying, but incomplete. Emily was still tethered to him, even if the rope was fraying. She'd visit less, argue more, but she hadn't let go. I needed her to sever it herself, to feel the betrayal twist both ways. So I dug into her secrets, her vulnerabilities. She'd always been private about her past, but I knew enough. There was a man before me, a brief fling she'd ended badly. I found him online. Daniel, a carpenter now, still bitter. I reached out. Daniel was easy to convince. "She cheated on me too," he said over the phone, voice rough. "Left me for you, I heard." I fed his resentment, told him she was at it again, spinning lies. "She's with some trainer now. Same old Emily." He cursed, eager to talk. I gave him Marcus's number, suggested he warn him about her. 2 days later, Emily stormed in, furious. "Marcus says some guy called him, Daniel. How does he even know?" I played dumb, heart pounding with dark glee. "No idea. Old boyfriend." Her face crumpled. She locked herself in the bathroom, sobbing. The call had done it. Marcus, paranoid and cornered, accused her of playing him. She denied it, but the seed was planted. Their next meeting, tracked via GPS, ended fast. She came home early, eyes puffy, and didn't speak. I knew they'd fought. I could smell the fracture. Daniel's voice had been the wedge, and I'd swung it perfectly. She was losing him, and with him the last shred of her defiance. I kept up the pressure, leaving more hints. Daniel's old photo in a book she'd pick up. A fake text from Marcus, saying ask her about Dan. She was unraveling, and I was the quiet architect of it all. Her money was gone now, our joint account drained, my private one safe. She'd funneled it to Marcus, thinking I wouldn't notice. I let her think that, let her dig the hole. Then I froze the account entirely, citing security issues with the bank. She panicked, scrambling for cash, but found nothing. "What's happening?" she asked, voice small. I shrugged. "Glitch, maybe." She didn't push, too distracted by her crumbling life. I watched her sell a necklace, her mother's, to cover his rent. It was pathetic, and I savored it. The final piece was Marcus's endgame. I'd broken his business, his body, his spirit. Now I'd take him out entirely. I tipped the bookies again, this time with a lie. "He's skipping town." They didn't ask questions. That night, his car was torched outside his house. Emily got the call, rushed over, came back hours later, ashen. "He's leaving," she whispered. "Says he can't stay." I nodded, hiding my triumph. He was running, and she'd be alone. But I wasn't done. She'd feel the full weight soon. With Marcus gone, Emily collapsed inward. She didn't leave the house for days, just sat in her robe, staring at the TV without seeing it. Her phone stayed silent. No friends, no lover, no lifeline. I'd stripped them all away, piece by piece, and now she was a ghost in our home. I kept up the act, bringing her meals, asking gentle questions, but inside, I was coiling for the last strike. She thought this was rock bottom. She was wrong. I'd saved the cruelest cut for when she was already bleeding. I started with our house. It was hers as much as mine, her pride, her sanctuary. She'd decorated every corner, hung photos of us smiling, built a life she could show off. I take that too. I'd been talking to a realtor for weeks, quietly listing it. The market was hot. It sold fast, cash offer, no contingencies. I signed the papers at work, kept it from her. She'd find out when it was too late. I packed my things slowly, clothes, books, my father's watch, stashing them in a storage unit. She didn't notice. She was too lost. One morning, I left a note on the counter. Bank called. Accounts empty. I'm sorting it out. It wasn't true, but it'd keep her off balance. Then I called her sister, Lisa, the one person she might still turn to. I'd always liked Lisa, but this wasn't personal. Emily's been distant, I told her, voice heavy. I found stuff, photos, receipts. She's been with someone. Lisa gasped, promised to check on her, but I knew she'd pull away too. Family was Emily's last thread. I'd snip it clean. When Lisa confronted her, Emily denied it, but the damage was done. Lisa stopped calling. I let her sit in that silence for a week. No money, no friends, no sister, no Marcus. The house sale closed. Movers were scheduled. I told them it was urgent, paid extra to keep it discreet. That Friday, I left for work, but I didn't come back. The movers arrived instead. Strangers boxing up her life while she stood there, stunned. What's happening? She called me, voice breaking. I didn't answer. I was already gone, checked into a hotel across town, watching it unfold through a neighbor's text. She's crying in the yard. The house was empty by nightfall. She had nowhere to go. Our accounts were locked, her credit tied to mine, her pride too shattered to beg. I planned it that way. She'd betrayed me, built a fantasy with him, and I'd raised it all. I pictured her standing there, alone, the life she'd known reduced to nothing. It wasn't enough yet. I wanted her to feel me in every absence, every loss, for years. That was my revenge. Not a scream, but a silence that crushed her. I didn't stop there. Emily was adrift, but I wanted her to drown. I'd taken her home, her money, her people. Now I'd take her name. She'd always been Emily Carter, the woman who'd made us a unit, a story. I'd erased that too. I filed for divorce that week, using Vince's photos as leverage. No contest, no settlement. She'd get nothing. I'd moved the savings, sold the house. There was no paper trail she could fight. My lawyer was ruthless, a shark I'd hired for this exact moment. She won't see a dime, he promised. She tried calling, dozens of times, voicemails piling up. Please just talk to me, she begged, her voice raw. I deleted them unheard. She showed up at my office once, mascara streaked, but security turned her away. I'd warned them, ex-wife unstable. She'd stood outside, shouting my name, until a guard escorted her off. I watched from the window, feeling nothing but the cold hum of victory. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger I'd broken. Word spread fast. Our small town loved a scandal, and I fed it just enough. A quiet word to a coworker, a hint to a neighbor. She was with someone else. Took everything I had. They filled in the rest. Gossip twisted her into a villain, a thief, a fool. Her old friends, the ones I'd turned, clucked their tongues. Her reputation crumbled. She couldn't hide from it. I heard she'd moved into a cheap motel, scraping by on odd jobs. No one helped. I'd made sure of that. Marcus surfaced once, called me from a burner, voice slurred. You did this, didn't you? I hung up, blocked him. He was in another state now, running from debts, irrelevant. But I sent one last gift. A package to his new address, photos of him and Emily, captioned, "She's why you fell." Let him chew on that, let it fester. They'd destroyed each other, and I'd been the blade. Emily would never know how deep I'd cut, how long I'd planned. She'd just feel it, every day, in the ruins I'd left her. I started over. New city, new job, new life. The house money bought me a condo, simple, quiet, mine. I didn't look back. She'd chosen him, gambled our years, and lost. I'd made her pay, not with noise or fury, but with precision. A slow, cruel erasure. Sometimes I'd wonder what she was doing, if she still whispered my name in the dark. Then I'd pour a drink and let it go. She wasn't my problem anymore. She was nothing. The divorce finalized on a gray Tuesday, the papers arriving in my new mailbox like a quiet trophy. Emily didn't fight it, couldn't really. My lawyer had buried her in evidence, and she had no resources left to push back. I drained every account she could have touched, sold every asset she might have claimed. The judge's ruling was curt. No alimony, no property, just her name stripped of mine. She was Emily Harris again, a ghost of the woman she'd been. I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. I just filed the papers away and poured a coffee, the silence of my condo wrapping around me like a reward. I heard whispers about her through the grapevine. Small-town threads still reached me, even here. She'd stayed in that motel, working nights at a diner, her hair tied back in a greasy ponytail. Someone saw her once, carrying a tray of half-eaten plates, her eyes hollow. She looks old, they said, and I pictured it. The woman who'd glowed with Marcus now faded, weighed down by the life I'd left her. It wasn't enough to know she was struggling. I wanted her to feel me in every shadow, every empty moment. I kept tabs, discreetly. A friend still in town, a guy I'd golfed with, sent updates when I asked. "She's alone," he'd text. "No one talks to her." I'd nod at my phone, satisfied. Her friends hadn't just drifted. They'd turned on her, fueled by the rumors I'd planted. Karen, the loudmouth, had spread the photo far. Lisa, her sister, wouldn't even take her calls. I'd severed every tie, left her an island. Sometimes I'd imagine her sitting in that dingy room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it all collapsed. She'd never guessed the architect was me. Marcus faded too. My last check, another favor from Vince, put him in a nowhere town, washing dishes, his gym dreams dust. The bookies had chased him out of state, and the photos I'd sent had done their work. He'd called Emily once, my friend said, screaming about betrayal before she hung up. They were done, 2 wreckage piles I'd scattered. I didn't care where he landed. He was just the spark that lit my fire. Emily was the target, the one who'd carved out my trust and handed it to him. She'd feel the cost longest. I settled into my new rhythm. Work, gym, quiet nights. No one here knew my story, and I liked it that way. The condo was sparse but mine. No echoes of her laughter in the walls. I'd burned the old photos, sold the furniture she'd picked. Every trace of us was gone, and with it, the man I'd been. She'd remade me, in a way, sharpened me into something harder, colder. I didn't miss her. I missed who I'd thought she was, but that was a ghost too. Months passed, and the updates grew scarce. My friends stopped texting. The town moved on. But I didn't. I checked the diner's online reviews sometimes, spotting her in the background of a blurry photo. A thin figure, apron-stained, clearing tables. She'd become invisible, a fixture no one noticed. It was perfect, in a way. Her pride had been her shield, and I'd melted it down. I'd wonder, late at night, if she ever thought of me. Did she replay our years, searching for the moment I turned? She'd never find it. I'd hidden too well. Then came the letter. It arrived forwarded from my old address, her handwriting shaky on the envelope. I almost tossed it, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page, ink smudged. "I'm sorry. I don't know how it happened. I miss us." No plea, no excuses. Just those words, raw and small. I read it once, then burned it over the sink, watching the flames eat her apology. Sorry didn't undo 20 years. Sorry didn't erase Marcus's hands on her, her lies in my bed. She missed us? I'd made sure there was no us left to miss. I sent no reply, but I dug again, called Vince, asked for one last sweep. He found her still at the diner, living in a rented room above it, her days a loop of work and sleep. She tried calling Lisa again, he said, but got voicemail. Her car, our old sedan, had broken down, and she couldn't fix it. No savings, no help. I thanked Vince, hung up, and sat in the dark, picturing her trapped in that cycle. I built it brick by brick and it held strong. I escalated one final time. The diner's owner was a man I'd once done taxes for. Small world. I called him casual, asked how business was. Then I mentioned her, offhand. Heard Emily's slipping. Customers complain she's slow, distracted. It wasn't true, but he'd check. A week later, Vince confirmed. She'd been fired. No reference, no safety net. She'd moved to a shelter, he said, her things in a single bag. I didn't smile, didn't cheer. I just nodded. She was nothing now, and I'd made her that. The condo felt lighter after that. I hung a painting, abstract, bold, where her photos once sat. I cooked for myself, took up hiking, let the past settle into silence. She'd been my world, then my wound. Now she was a memory I'd erased, a lesson I'd learned. I didn't need her to know it was me. The wreckage was enough. Her life a monument to my revenge, standing quiet and cold. A year later, I got a call from Lisa. She tracked me down through my old firm, her voice tight. "Emily's in the hospital," she said. "Overdose. Pills. She's alive, but barely." I waited for guilt, for something to stir, but nothing came. "What happened?" I asked, flat. Lisa hesitated. She lost everything, job, place. Said she couldn't take it. I murmured condolences, promised to send flowers, then hung up. I didn't send them. She'd built that cliff, stepped off it. I just cleared the path. I drove past the old town that weekend, not to see her, just to feel the distance. The house was gone, replaced by a new build, kids playing in the yard. The diner had a fresh sign, new staff. Her world had vanished, overwritten, like she'd never been. I stopped at a gas station, bought a coffee, and sat in my car, watching the clouds roll. Lisa's words echoed. Overdose, barely alive, but they didn't pierce me. She'd chosen Marcus, chosen lies. I'd chosen justice, my way. Vince sent a final report, unasked. She'd survived, moved to a state facility, medicated and quiet. No visitors, no calls. Marcus was a footnote, jail now, some petty theft charge. They'd crashed separately, beautifully. I deleted the email, closed the chapter. My life was here, new city, new routines, no shadows. I'd rebuilt, brick by careful brick, while she'd crumbled. That was the balance I'd wanted. Her loss, my gain, a ledger squared. I started dating again, cautiously. A woman from work, Sarah, soft-spoken, steady. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer. We'd share dinners, walks, small moments. Emily and I had lost long before Marcus. Sarah's laugh was different, lighter, and I liked it. I didn't compare them. Emily was a closed file, a case I'd solved. I'd taken her apart, left her in pieces, and walked away clean. That was enough. The old rage faded, replaced by calm. I'd won. Not with noise, but with silence, precision. A slow unraveling she'd never trace. She'd live, maybe, in that gray facility, but she wouldn't live well. I'd made sure of that. And me? I keep going, my condo a fortress, my days my own. She'd been my wife, my betrayer, my project. Now she was just a name I'd forgotten how to say. 2 years on, I got a photo. Unexpected, slipped under my door. It was Emily, gaunt and gray, sitting on a bench outside that facility. Her eyes were empty, her hands clutching a cheap coat, a note on the back, and signed, "She talks about you." I stared at it, the image sharp against my clean life. Who sent it? Lisa? A nurse? It didn't matter. I burned it like her letter, the ashes curling in my sink. She talked about me? Good. Let her. Let my name be a weight she couldn't shake, a ghost in her fog. I'd heard she'd stabilized meds, therapy, a routine of sorts. She'd even tried writing me again, a rambling letter the facility forwarded. I didn't open it, just marked it return to sender. She didn't get to reach me, didn't get forgiveness. I'd given her 20 years. She'd given me lies. The scales were tipped, and I'd balanced them my way. Sarah asked once, seeing the envelope, "Old friend?" I shook my head. "Old business. Done." She didn't press, and I loved her for it. My life was full now, Work promotions, weekend trips with Sarah, a dog we'd adopted, a scruffy mutt named Max. The condo had color, her paintings, my books, his toys scattered. I'd built something new, something she'd never touch. But I'd check sometimes, late at night, pulling up the facility's site, its stark photos of beige halls. She was there, a number in their system, and I'd close the tab, satisfied. She'd lost more than I'd ever taken. She'd lost herself. Marcus was a memory too. Last I heard, he'd gotten out, drifted west, a shadow of the man he'd been. I didn't care enough to track him further. He'd been the tool, not the target. Emily was the heart I'd carved out, the life I'd dismantled. I'd made her feel every cut. Friends, home, pride, hope, and left her with nothing but my absence. That was the cruelty. Not a blow, but a void she'd fall into forever. I didn't dream of her anymore. The old house, her laugh, the sting of that receipt. They'd faded. I'd replaced them with Sarah's voice, Max's bark, the hum of a life I'd earned. She'd gambled us away, and I'd collected the debt. If she talked about me, let her choke on it. I was done looking back. My revenge wasn't loud. It was permanent, a quiet ruin she'd carry alone. 5 years later, I got a call. Lisa again, her voice older, worn. "She's gone," she said. "Last night." Heart gave out. I paused, coffee cup halfway to my lips, waiting for something. Grief, relief, anything. Nothing came. "Thanks for telling me," I said, and hung up. Gone. Emily Harris, dead at 47, a footnote in a facility log. I didn't ask for details, didn't need them. I'd written her end years ago. This was just the ink drying. Sarah was at work, Max napping by the window. I sat there, sunlight cutting through the blinds, and thought about it. Not her, but me. I'd torn her down, step by calculated step, and walked away whole. She'd betrayed me, and I'd repaid it tenfold. Not with shouts or tears, but with a cold, patient hand. Her friends, her home, her lover, her will. I'd taken them all, left her a shell. And now she was ash while I was here, alive, steady. I didn't go to the funeral. Lisa texted the date, but I deleted it. No point. I'd buried her long before. When I sold the house, froze the accounts, watched her crumble. The town might mourn, might whisper, but I wouldn't. She'd chosen her path. I'd paved it to its end. Sarah came home that night, kissed my cheek, asked how my day was. "Quiet," I said, smiling. She didn't know, didn't need to. My past was a vault, locked tight. I hiked that weekend, Max bounding ahead, Sarah laughing beside me. The air was crisp, the sky wide. I felt light, lighter than I'd been in years. Emily's shadow was gone, not because she'd left, but because I'd erased it. I'd made her pay, not with noise or chaos, but with a silence so deep it swallowed her. She'd never known it was me, never seen the strings. That was the beauty of it. My revenge was mine alone, a perfect, private victory. I kept living, work, love, small joys. She was a name I'd once known, a life I'd unmade. If there was justice, it was this. I stood tall while she'd fallen, piece by piece, into nothing. I didn't toast her end, didn't mark it. I just turned the page. My story went on, hers stopped. That was enough. That was everything.